Blood has a way of telling stories before words ever can. And on that humid Sacramento night in late July, the blood trailing down the American River embankment was screaming a tale Chen never wanted to hear. She'd come to the water's edge like she always did, escaping the fluorescent hell of Sacramento River Medical Center's trauma bay, where the scent of antiseptic and desperation clung to her scrubs like a second skin. 34 years old, 10 years into emergency nursing, and she perfected the art being alone. Not lonely. She'd correct anyone who dared suggest it. Just alone. There's a difference. Loneliness implies you're missing something. Maris had convinced herself she'd simply stopped looking. The river was her refuge. Her moment of silence between the chaos of gunshot wounds and overdoses, between holding the hands of dying strangers and washing their blood from beneath her fingernails. She'd sit on the same weather bench, smoke a cigarette she didn't really want, and let the sound of moving water drown out the memories she couldn't quite shake. Tonight should have been no different. Should have been. But the universe has a twisted sense of timing. She heard him before she saw him, a wet, gasping sound that made her nurse's instinct override every self-preservation alarm screaming in her head. The sound of someone drowning on dry land. Someone whose lungs were filling with their own blood. She was on her feet before conscious thought caught up, her cigarette falling forgotten into the dirt as she moved toward the embankment's edge. That's when she saw him. A man, maybe early 30s, crawling to the mud and river grass like something half-dead, trying to outrun the rest of the dying. His shirt was soaked through, not with river water, but with blood that looked black in the moonlight. Fresh blood, arterial blood, the kind that meant minutes, not hours. He clutched something to his chest with desperate strength, a leather messenger bag that seemed more important to him than stopping the bleeding. His face was pale as death, lips already going blue, but his eyes, God, his eyes were wild with something beyond pain, beyond fear, terror with purpose. That's what it was. Maris moved without thinking, her medical training overriding every logical reason she should have run the other way. She was beside him in seconds, her hands already assessing, cataloging, triaging. Multiple stab wounds. One to the right upper quadrant, likely liver involvement. Another to the left flank, possibly kidney. A defensive wound across his forearm, where he'd tried to protect himself. Blood loss significant. Shock setting in. Survival time. Limited. Don't, he gasped, trying to pull away from her. Don't, they're coming. Shut up and let me work. Maris snapped, the same voice she used on combative drunks in the ER. She pressed her hand against the worst wound, feeling the hot pulse of blood against her palm. Who did this to you? He didn't answer. His eyes rolled back, consciousness slipping like sand through fingers. Hey! She slapped his face, not gently. Stay with me. You don't get to die on my break. What's your name? Caden, he whispered, the word barely audible. Please, she's just a baby. Maris froze. She? Baby? That's when she heard it. A sound so incongruous with blood and violence that her brain almost rejected it as impossible. A small whimper. A infant's cry, muffled but unmistakable, coming from inside the leather bag clutched against Caden's chest. Jesus Christ, Maris breathed. Her hands were already moving, unzipping the bag with blood-slick fingers. Inside, wrapped in what looked like a hoodie, was a baby girl. 6 months old, maybe younger. Dark hair, wide eyes that should have been terrified, but instead just looked confused. Unharmed. Completely, miraculously unharmed. What the hell did you do? Maris demanded, but Caden was fading fast. She had seconds to make a decision that would change everything. Call 911. Get this man and baby to a hospital. Let the system handle whatever nightmare had brought them to this river. That was the smart choice. The safe choice. The choice that let her walk away and return to her carefully constructed isolation. But something in his eyes stopped her. Something in the way he looked at that baby. Like she was the only thing in the world worth dying for. Maris made a choice she'd questioned 1,000 times in the weeks to come. My car is close, she said, already calculating. Can you walk? He tried. God, he tried. But his legs folded like paper, and Maris found herself supporting most of his weight, this bleeding stranger and his infant daughter, half carrying them toward the parking lot while her mind raced through supplies she had at home. Suture kit from her nursing school days. Antibiotics she'd hoarded from her last sinus infection. For fluid she'd borrowed from the hospital 6 months ago when her neighbor's kid had gotten dehydrated. Not exactly protocol. Not exactly legal. But possibly enough to keep him alive until she figured out what the hell was happening. Her cottage was 15 minutes away, tucked behind a neighborhood of elderly homeowners who minded their own business. One of the reasons she'd chosen it. She got Caden into her Civic, the baby still clutched in his weakening arms, and drove through Sacramento's empty streets like she was transporting nitroglycerin. Every red light felt like an eternity. Every passing car felt like a threat. "Stay awake," she kept saying, glancing over at him. "Tell me about her. The baby. What's her name?" "Althea," he whispered. "Her name is Althea. Pretty name. How old?" 6 months, 3 weeks. His breathing was getting shallower. Worse. And her mother? Where's her mother, Caden? The sound he made wasn't quite a sob, wasn't quite a gasp. Dead. They killed her 3 weeks ago. Made it look like robbery. Maris's hands tightened on the steering wheel. She should have felt fear. Should have turned around right then and driven to the nearest police station. But something in her, some broken piece she tried to bury, recognized the truth in his voice. The kind of grief that doesn't lie. Her cottage appeared like a sanctuary, small and dark and safe. She practically carried Caden inside, lay him on her kitchen table because her couch was too soft for what needed to happen. The baby, Althea, she placed in the sink, still wrapped in that hoodie, still somehow calm despite the insanity surrounding her. Those wide eyes just watched Maris with something that looked almost like trust. "Don't look at me like that," Maris muttered to the infant. "I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who's terrible at minding her own business." But her hands were already moving with practiced efficiency. Scissors cutting away Caden's blood-soaked shirt. Sterile gloves snapping on. Betadine swabbing across skin that was too pale, too cold. The wounds were deep, but miraculously seemed to have missed the major vessels. Lucky, impossibly lucky. The kind of lucky that made Maris wonder if someone upstairs was paying attention after all. She worked in focused silence, the same silence that overtook her in the trauma bay when the case was critical. Irrigating wounds, packing bleeding, starting in 4-line in his arm with hands that didn't shake despite the absurdity of performing emergency medicine in her kitchen at 2 a.m. Caden drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally gasping, occasionally trying to speak. "Althea," he kept saying. "Is she okay?" "She's fine," Maris replied, not looking up from her work. "Better than you. Bar's pretty low, though." Somewhere around a third suture, Caden's eyes opened fully, lucid for the first time. He stared at her with an intensity that made Maris uncomfortable. "Why are you helping me?" he asked. "You don't know me. Don't know what I've done. What they'll do to you if they find out." Maris tied off a stitch with more force than necessary. "You think I haven't seen violence before? I work trauma in Sacramento. I've sewn up gang members, wife beaters, and everything in between. You don't scare me." "You should be scared," he said softly. "These people, they killed my wife because she was going to testify about human trafficking. She worked for a nonprofit, got too close to something big. They made her disappear in a way that barely made the news." His voice cracked. "I came home and found her, and I knew they'd come for Althea next. She was there. She saw faces. Even a baby, they can't risk it." Maris's hands paused. Human trafficking. Testimony. Murder. Every word made the situation exponentially more dangerous, more insane, more impossible to walk away from. "So you ran," she said quietly. "I ran. Grabbed everything I could, emptied our savings, and ran. Been moving every few days. Thought I was careful. Thought I'd lost them." He laughed bitterly. "Found me at a motel tonight. I barely got Althea out before they came through the door. Fought my way out. Didn't think I'd make it to the river." "You barely did." Maris finished the last suture, covered it with gauze, and stepped back to assess her work. Not pretty, but functional. He'd live. Probably. You need a hospital. Real antibiotics. Imaging to make sure nothing's nicked that I can't see. No hospitals. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. They have people everywhere. Police, too. My wife's case. It was closed in 48 hours. Robbery gone wrong. No suspects. No investigation. That's how I know how deep this goes. Maris looked down at his hand on her wrist, then up at his face. Fear and desperation warred there, but underneath it all, love. Fierce, protective, absolute love for that baby girl watching them from the kitchen sink. She should have said no. Should have told him to leave as soon as he could walk. Should have protected herself the way she'd learned to protect herself from every other person who tried to get too close in the past decade. Instead, she heard herself say, 3 days. You can stay 3 days. Gives you time to heal enough to move. Gives me time to figure out if you're telling the truth or if I've just committed career suicide for a very convincing liar. Relief flooded Caden's face. Thank you. God, thank you. I don't even know your name. Maris Chen. She pulled her hand free and moved to wash the blood from her skin. And don't thank me yet. If you're lying, if this brings trouble to my door, I'll turn you in myself. Clear. Crystal, the baby, Althea, chose that moment to start crying in earnest, a sound that cut through the tension like a knife. Maris watched as Caden tried to sit up, tried to go to his daughter despite the fresh sutures pulling at his skin. He nearly fell, would have fallen if Maris hadn't caught him. For God's sake! Stay down, she snapped, then surprised herself by lifting Althea from the sink. The baby was warm and solid in her arms, real in a way that made something in Maris's chest constrict painfully. When's the last time she ate? Caden's face went blank. There's formula in the bag. I'm not good at this. Emily, always. He stopped, her name hanging in the air like a ghost. Emily, the murdered wife. The mother this baby would never remember. Maris looked down at Althea, who'd stopped crying and was now studying her with those impossibly trusting eyes. 6 months old and already orphaned, already running for her life, already dependent on a father who was bleeding out on a stranger's kitchen table, and a stranger who'd stopped believing in connection years ago. Okay, Maris said softly, more to herself than to anyone else. Okay, 3 days. We can do 3 days. But even as she said it, even as she found the formula and heated the bottle and watched this tiny human drink like she didn't have a care in the world, Maris knew she was lying to herself. 3 days wasn't going to be enough. 3 days wasn't going to be nearly enough. Because something had shifted in that moment on the riverbank. Some wall she'd built brick by careful brick over years of loss and loneliness. And now there was a crack in it, and blood and desperate hope were seeping through, and she was terrified it might already be too late to patch it closed. She looked at Caden, unconscious now on her table, his daughter in her arms, and blood on her floor that she'd have to scrub out before dawn. Her peaceful isolation was over. Her carefully controlled life was over. Whatever happened next, nothing would be the same. The question was simple and terrifying. Was she ready to fight for strangers who'd stumbled into her life through violence and desperation? Was she ready to become someone who didn't walk away? And more importantly, when the people hunting this family came knocking, and they would come knocking, would she have the courage to stand between them and a baby who'd already lost everything? What would you do if saving someone else meant risking everything you'd built to protect yourself? 3 days turned into 7, and Maris stopped counting. Maybe it was the way Caden winced every time he tried to lift Althea, reminding her that his wounds weren't just healing. They were telling a story of survival she couldn't ignore. Maybe it was how the baby had started smiling at her, that gummy, innocent smile that seemed to say you're safe, when Maris herself didn't feel safe at all. Or maybe, just maybe, it was a fact that for the first time in years, her cottage didn't echo with silence when she came home from her shifts at the hospital. But comfort, Maris was learning, is just another word for vulnerability. Caden recovered slowly, his body knitting itself back together with the stubborn determination of someone who'd already decided death wasn't an option. During the day, while Maris worked 12-hour trauma shifts, he stayed hidden in her cottage, caring for Althea with the clumsy devotion of a father learning to parent alone. She'd come home to find him exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, baby spit up on his shoulder, but always with Althea fed, changed, and safe. The man was running on fumes and love, and it showed. "You're going to collapse if you don't sleep," Maris said one evening, finding him swaying on his feet at 2 a.m, rocking a fussy Althea. She'd just gotten off a particularly brutal shift. 3 gunshot wounds. 2 didn't make it, and the last thing she needed was another patient. "Can't sleep?" Caden mumbled, his eyes glazed with exhaustion. "Every time I close my eyes, I see Emily. See them breaking down our door. See. Give her to me." Maris took Althea before he could protest, settling the baby against her shoulder with a competence that surprised them both. "Go to bed. Actually sleep. That's not a suggestion." He wanted to argue. She could see it in the stubborn set of his jaw. But his body betrayed him. He was asleep on her couch within minutes, and Maris was left alone with a 6-month-old who seemed perfectly content to drool on her favorite scrubs. "Your dad's an idiot," she whispered to Althea, walking slow circles around her small living room. "Brave, but an idiot. You know the difference? Brave people survive. Idiots get themselves killed." The baby cooed, and Maris felt something dangerous bloom in her chest. Affection, connection, the very thing she'd sworn off. "Don't look at me like that. I'm not keeping you. 3 days, remember? We're way past 3 days, but that doesn't mean..." Althea grabbed a fistful of Maris's hair and yanked, giggling. "Point taken," Maris sighed. The routine they fell into was accidental, organic, and terrifyingly domestic. Maris would work her shifts, come home to find dinner waiting. Caden's cooking improved from catastrophic to merely questionable, and they'd spend evenings trading stories while Althea played on a blanket between them. He told her about Emily, about how they'd met at a community center where she volunteered teaching English to refugees. How she'd been fierce and funny and completely fearless. How she'd stumbled onto the trafficking ring by accident, noticed patterns in the women she was teaching, women who disappeared or showed up with bruises they wouldn't explain. She couldn't let it go, Caden said one night, his voice rough with memory. That was Emily. She saw injustice and ran straight at it. I begged her to be careful, begged her to let the authorities handle it. He laughed bitterly. Turns out the authorities were part of the problem. Maris listened, filing away details, her nurse's brain cataloging information like symptoms of disease she was trying to diagnose. Human trafficking, corrupt police, a murdered woman who'd gotten too close to the truth, and a baby who was somehow loose and they needed to tie off. What did Emily find? Maris asked carefully. What was worth killing her for? Caden's hand went to his pocket, pulling out a small USB drive that looked unremarkable, just a piece of plastic and metal that held secrets deadly enough to murder for. Names, dates, financial records. She'd been documenting everything for months. Police officers on the payroll, city officials, business owners who provided locations. She was going to turn it over to the FBI field office in San Francisco. We had an appointment scheduled. When, the day after they killed her, his voice cracked. They knew. Somehow they knew. The USB drive sat on Maris's coffee table like a grenade with the pin pulled, and she couldn't stop staring at it. Evidence. Proof. The kind of thing that could bring down an entire operation, or get everyone who touched it killed. But here's what Maris was learning about herself, piece by uncomfortable piece. She wasn't the woman who walked away anymore. Maybe she never had been. Maybe all those years of isolation had just been waiting for the right reason to crack open. We need to be smart about this, she said finally. If what you're saying is true, if the corruption goes as deep as you think, we can't just walk into a police station and hope for the best. Caden looked at her with something that might have been hope. We. Maris ignored the question, and the flutter in her chest it caused. I have a friend, nursing school roommate. She works for the FBI now, Victim Services Division in San Francisco. If anyone could get this to the right people, No. Caden's response was immediate, sharp. No FBI. No police. No one. Every person we tell is another person who could sell us out. Then what's your plan? Maris demanded. Run forever? Keep Althea hidden until she's 18? They found you once, Caden. They'll find you again. The argument hung between them, tense and unresolved, until Althea started crying, and they both moved to comfort her, their hands colliding, their eyes meeting over the baby's head. The moment stretched, loaded with something neither of them was ready to name. That's when Maris's phone rang. Unknown number. Her blood went cold. Don't answer it, Caden said, his voice tight with fear. But Maris had never been good at running from things. She answered, putting it on speaker. Maris Chen, a man's voice, smooth and professional. We haven't met, but I think you have something that belongs to me. Or rather, someone. Every muscle in Caden's body went rigid. He mouthed the name Marcus Drake, the trafficking ring's leader, the man who'd ordered Emily's murder. Maris forced her voice steady. I think you have the wrong number. Do I? Because our mutual friend Caden has been very difficult to track. But people get sloppy when they're desperate. Security camera at Sacramento River Medical Center caught something interesting 12 days ago. A nurse carrying a man matching Caden's description from the parking lot. Your parking lot, Maris. Your car. The world tilted. They knew. They'd known for days and had been watching, waiting, playing with him like a cat with wounded mice. What do you want? Maris asked, abandoning pretense. The USB drive, and a promise that this unfortunate situation ends quietly. In exchange, I'll let you walk away. You're a nurse, not a criminal. No reason you should die for someone else's mistakes. And Caden, the baby, a pause. Then, almost gently, we both know that's not negotiable. But you're innocent in this. You were just trying to help. Noble, really. But this is your chance to save yourself. The line went dead. Maris stood frozen, phone in hand, while Caden's breathing turned ragged beside her. She could feel his terror, could practically see him calculating how fast they could run, where they could hide. But Maris's mind was racing in a different direction entirely. We have to leave, Caden said, already moving, grabbing Althea. Now. Tonight. They could be outside right now. Stop. Maris caught his arm. Just stop and think. If they want to take us now, we'd already be dead. That call was a test. They want to see if I'll turn on you, if I'll give you up to save myself. So what do we do? And there it was, the moment everything changed. Because Caden hadn't said, he'd said we. Like Maris was already part of this, already committed, already family. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it clarified everything. We fight back, Maris said quietly. But smart. My friend at the FBI, Rebecca Kim. We were close once. Really close. I trust her with my life. More importantly, I trust her with Althea's life. Over the next 72 hours, they became fugitives in their own city. Maris called in sick to work. First time in 6 years, and they moved through Sacramento like ghosts, never staying in one place more than a few hours. They crashed with Maris's estranged sister Jenny in Elk Grove, a relationship she neglected for years, but who took one look at baby Althea and asked no questions. They hid in a budget motel off Highway 99, paying cash, using fake names. They even spent one desperate night in Caden's truck, parked behind a 24-hour Walmart, taking turns keeping watch while Althea slept between them. And through it all, they got closer. Not romantically, not yet, but in the way people do when survival depends on absolute trust. Maris learned that Caden had been a high school teacher before Emily died, that he loved terrible action movies, and could quote entire Monty Python sketches from memory, that he blamed himself for not protecting Emily, for letting her pursue the investigation, for not seeing the danger until it was too late, that he woke up gasping some nights, reaching for a wife who wasn't there, and only Althea's presence could calm him down. Caden learned that Maris had been engaged once, 7 years ago, to a firefighter named David who died in a warehouse collapse, that she'd built her walls brick by brick after his funeral, convinced that loving people just meant more opportunities for loss, that she smoked when she was stressed and couldn't cook to save her life, that she sang off-key lullabies to Althea when she thought no one was listening. They learned how to be a team, how to anticipate each other's movements, finish each other's sentences, communicate in glances across rooms, how to share the burden of keeping a 6-month-old alive, and entertained while dodging contract killers. "We make a strange team," Caden said one afternoon, watching Maris change Althea's diaper with practiced efficiency while simultaneously researching FBI field offices on her phone. "Strange beats dead," Maris replied, but she was smiling. The contact with Rebecca Kim happened in a coffee shop in Davis, neutral territory where Maris hoped the traffickers wouldn't have eyes. Rebecca showed up looking every inch a federal agent. Sharp suit, sharper eyes, the kind of woman who didn't miss details. She'd been beautiful in nursing school. Now she was formidable. "This is insane," Rebecca said after Maris explained everything in hushed, urgent tones. "You're telling me there's a trafficking ring operating with police protection in Sacramento, and you have evidence?" "Had evidence." Maris slid the USB drive across the table. "Now you have it. But Caden and his daughter, they need protection. Witness security. Something." Rebecca's eyes softened as she looked at where Caden sat across the cafe, Althea in his arms, trying to look casual while clearly dying inside with anxiety. "He really doesn't know you're meeting with me? He'd have tried to stop me. Trust issues with law enforcement. Can't imagine why." "Maris." Rebecca's hand covered hers. "If what's on this drive is real, if it's as big as you're saying, you're in danger too. They won't just let you walk away." "I know." And she did. Somewhere between finding Caden bleeding by the river and sitting in this coffee shop, committing to a course of action that could get her killed, Maris had accepted it. She wasn't walking away. Not from Caden. Not from Althea. Not from the first people in years who'd made her feel something other than numb. But the universe, as Maris was learning, has a cruel sense of timing. The text message came through while she was still sitting with Rebecca. From Jenny, her sister. 5 words that made her blood turn to ice. "They have me. Exchange for baby." Maris's hand started shaking. Rebecca saw it immediately, read the message, and her professional mask slipped for just a moment, revealing genuine fear underneath. "We need to move now," Rebecca said, already pulling out her phone. "I can have a tactical team assembled in..." "They'll kill her." Maris's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "My sister, they'll kill her if we bring in a team." "You know they will." Across the cafe. Caden must have sensed something wrong. Because he was on his feet, Althea clutched to his chest, moving toward them. When Maris showed him the message, she watched something break behind his eyes. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "God, Maris, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. All of it. Your sister." "Shut up." Maris cut him off, her mind already racing through scenarios, options, possibilities. "Just shut up and let me think." But what was there to think about? The choice seemed impossible, unbearable. Her sister's life for Althea's. Family for family. How did you make that calculation? How did you choose? The answer, when it came, was simple and terrifying. You didn't choose. You fought for both. You found a third option even when there wasn't one. You became the kind of person who didn't accept impossible choices. "We give them what they want," Maris said slowly, an idea forming. "We arrange the exchange. My sister for Althea." "No." Caden's voice was firm. "Absolutely not. I won't let you. You're not listening." Maris looked between Caden and Rebecca, her plan crystallizing with the clarity of a diagnosis clicking into place. "We give them what they want, but we don't give them what they expect. Rebecca, how fast can you get an undercover team in place? People who can pass as civilians." Rebecca's eyes sharpened with understanding. 12 hours. Maybe less. Then we have a chance. Maris stood, her decision made. We set the trap. We get my sister back. We end this. But even as she said it, even as they began planning in urgent whispers over cold coffee, a question burned in Maris's mind. one she couldn't shake, couldn't answer. What happens when ordinary people face impossible choices? When nurses become warriors, when fathers become fugitives, when the only way to save a family is to risk everything you've ever been. And more terrifying still, when the people hunting you have nothing to lose and you have everything to lose, who wins? The answer would come soon enough. Too soon. Because in exactly 18 hours, they'd find out if love and desperation and a USB drive full of evidence were enough to fight back against people who turned murder into a business transaction. Maris looked at Caden, at Althea, at Rebecca, who was already making calls to set their desperate plan in motion. She'd spent years avoiding exactly this. The risk, the connection, the possibility of loss. Now she was running straight toward it. And the only question that mattered was whether she'd survive long enough to know if it was worth it. Here's what nobody tells you about becoming someone's last hope. The weight doesn't hit you all at once. It builds. Slow. Steady. Like water filling a glass until that final drop makes everything overflow. And as Maris sat in Rebecca's FBI vehicle 18 hours later, watching the sun set over the old industrial district near Sacramento's port, she felt that weight pressing down on her chest like a physical thing. This was it. The moment where all the choices she'd made since finding a bleeding stranger by the river would either save everyone she'd come to love or destroy them all. The plan was simple. Dangerously simple. The kind of simple that meant 1,000 things could go wrong. They arranged the exchange for an abandoned warehouse on the waterfront. The kind of place where shipping containers rusted in neat rows and security cameras had stopped working years ago. Marcus Drake had chosen it. Of course, his territory, his advantage. But what he didn't know was that Rebecca had spent the last 12 hours turning that warehouse into a trap. Undercover agents posing as dock workers. Surveillance equipment hidden in shipping containers. A tactical team positioned 3 blocks away. Close enough to respond, but far enough to avoid detection. The traffickers wanted the USB drive and Althea. In exchange, they'd promised to release Jenny and let Caden and Maris walk away. A promise worth exactly nothing, which everyone involved understood perfectly well. This was an exchange. It was an execution waiting to happen, unless they moved first. "You don't have to be there," Rebecca said for the 3rd time, adjusting her concealed earpiece. She was dressed like a dock worker, flannel shirt and jeans, but her eyes were all federal agent. Sharp, calculating, missing nothing. "Caden can make the exchange. You've done enough." "She's my sister," Maris replied, checking the wire taped to her ribs for the 4th time. The adhesive pulled at her skin, a constant reminder that everything she said would be recorded, evidence for the trial that would come after. If there was an after. "I'm going." In the back seat, Caden sat with Althea in his arms, his face a mask of controlled terror. The baby was awake. Played with his fingers, completely oblivious of the fact that her existence had sparked a war. She looked at Maris and smiled, and something in Maris's chest cracked wide open. When had this baby become hers? When had this man become someone she'd die to protect? The answer was simple and complicated. Somewhere between the first night and now. Somewhere in the space between saving a stranger and becoming a family. "If this goes wrong," Caden started, but Maris cut him off. "It won't. But if it does, if something happens to me, promise me you'll take care of her. Raise her. Be the mother she—" "Nothing's going to happen to you," Maris said fiercely, reaching back to grip his hand. "We're all walking out of here. You, me, Althea, and Jenny. All of us. That's not hope talking. That's the plan." But was it? Could you really plan for men who killed without hesitation, who'd murdered Emily in cold blood, and would do the same to anyone who got in their way? 6:45 p.m. 15 minutes to the exchange. They drove in silence through streets where Maris had lived her entire adult life. Past the hospital where she'd saved countless lives. Past the river where she'd found Caden bleeding out. Past her cottage, dark now and empty, waiting to see if she'd ever come home again. Sacramento had always felt like a city of strangers to her, a place she existed in, but never belonged to. Now, with everything on the line, it felt like she was seeing it clearly for the first time. This was her city, her home, and she'd be damned if she let it be poisoned by people who treated human lives like commodities. The warehouse loomed ahead, exactly as threatening as it needed to be for maximum psychological impact. Rust and shadows and the smell of old oil mixing with river water. 2 black SUVs were already parked outside, and Maris counted at least 4 men visible, which meant there were probably twice that many hidden. Rebecca pulled to a stop 50 feet away. Remember the signal. If things go sideways, if you feel threatened at all, you say, "I need air." That's the trigger. Tactical moves are within 90 seconds. 90 seconds is a long time to be shot at, Maris observed. Then don't get shot. Rebecca's attempt at levity fell flat. Her hand touched Maris's shoulder. "I mean it. You've been brave enough. If this feels wrong, you abort. We find another way." But there was no other way. They all knew it. This was the end game, the only move left on the board. Maris got out of the car, and Caden followed with Althea. The baby had started to fuss, sensing the tension in her father's arms. Maris took her, and Althea immediately calmed, tiny fingers gripping Maris's shirt. Even now, even here, this child trusted her absolutely. The weight of that trust was crushing. They walked toward the warehouse entrance, where a man Maris recognized from the USB files waited. Mid-40s, expensive suit that looked wrong in the setting, eyes like sharks, flat, predatory, empty of anything resembling humanity. Marcus Drake in person looked exactly like a man who built an empire on suffering. "Ms. Chen," he said pleasantly, as if they were meeting for coffee instead of a hostage exchange. And Caden, still alive, impressive considering. "Where's my sister?" Maris demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. Marcus gestured behind him, and 2 men dragged Jenny forward. She looked terrified but unharmed. Duct tape over her mouth, hands zip-tied behind her back. Her eyes found Maris and filled with tears, relief and fear and apology all mixing together. "The USB drive," Marcus said simply. Caden pulled it from his pocket, held it up. "My daughter first. And Jenny. Both of them safe before you get this." Marcus smiled. It was a kind of smile that made Maris's skin crawl. "I don't think you're in a position to negotiate." That's when everything went wrong. It happened fast, faster than Maris could process. One of Marcus's men moved toward Althea, and Caden's body reacted on pure instinct, putting himself between the man and his daughter. There was a flash of metal, a knife appearing from nowhere, and suddenly Caden was fighting, really fighting, the kind of desperate combat that had no rules or honor, just survival. Maris stumbled backward with Althea, her mind screaming at her run, but Jenny was right there, still captive, and Rebecca's team was 90 seconds away, and Caden was bleeding again, a new wound opening across his shoulder as he grappled with a man twice his size. "Stop!" Maris shouted, and her voice cut through the chaos with surprising authority. "Stop, or I destroy the drive. Right here, right now." She held up the USB drive, her lighter in her other hand. A bluff, mostly, but Marcus didn't know that. She saw his calculation, saw him weighing the value of the evidence against the cost of the fight. "You wouldn't," he said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Try me, my sister, unharmed. Caden, unharmed. Then you get what you came for." The standoff stretched, seconds feeling like hours. Althea was crying now, and the sound seemed to echo off the warehouse walls. Maris could feel her wire pressing against her ribs, recording everything. Rebecca would be listening, waiting for the signal, probably losing her mind with the desire to send the team in early. But Maris needed more. She needed Marcus to confess, needed him to give them something concrete that would hold up in court. Evidence wasn't enough. They needed his words. "Why Emily?" Maris asked, her voice softer now, almost conversational. "Why kill her? She was just a teacher, a volunteer. What was she to you?" Marcus's expression shifted, became almost philosophical. "She was a problem that needed solving. Your friend's wife," he nodded toward Caden. "She had a habit of asking questions, documenting answers, building cases that could destroy very profitable enterprises. When she contacted the FBI about an appointment, well, we couldn't allow that. So you murdered her." Maris's hand tightened on the USB drive, made it look like a robbery. Clean. Professional. Would have been the end of it if Caden here had done the smart thing and disappeared. But he had to keep running. Had to keep the child alive. Had to leave a trail. Marcus shook his head, almost admiringly. Paternal devotion. Touching, really. Also incredibly stupid. There it was. Confession. Clear. Recorded. Enough to bury him. Maris caught Caden's eye across the warehouse floor. He was still bleeding, still held by two of Marcus's men, but he gave her the smallest nod. He understood. She'd gotten what they needed. I need air, Maris said clearly. The trigger phrase. Marcus's eyes narrowed. What? I said I need air. It's stuffy in here. All this talk of murder tends to make a room feel claustrophobic. For a moment, nothing happened. Then Maris heard it. The sound of vehicles approaching fast, of boots hitting pavement, of Rebecca's voice amplified through a bullhorn. FBI, drop your weapons. Hands where we can see them. The warehouse exploded into controlled chaos. Marcus's men scattered, some running, some raising weapons, all of them realizing too late that they'd walked into a trap. The tactical team poured in through 3 entrances simultaneously, moving with the precision of people who'd trained for exactly this scenario. But Marcus was faster than he should have been. He grabbed Jenny, pulled her in front of him as a shield, a gun appearing in his hand and pressing against her temple. Everyone stops or she dies, he screamed, and his voice had lost all its cultured smoothness. This was raw survival now, a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. The FBI agents froze. Rebecca froze. Even Caden, being secured by agents, went still. Maris didn't freeze. Maybe it was the 10 years of trauma nursing, of making split-second decisions while people bled out in front of her. Maybe it was a rage she felt at seeing her sister used as a shield by a man who'd built his fortune on suffering. Maybe it was a way of Althea in her arms, this innocent child who deserved to grow up knowing her father's sacrifice meant something. Whatever it was, Maris moved. She stepped forward, putting herself between Marcus and the exit he was clearly calculating toward. You're not taking her. Get out of my way, Marcus snarled, but his gun wavered slightly. Shoot me, then. Put a bullet in a nurse, holding a baby. Let that be on the recording that's going to every news station in California. Let that be your legacy. Maris, don't. Rebecca's voice, urgent and afraid. But Maris was done being afraid. She was done hiding from connection, from risk, from the possibility that loving people meant losing them. She'd lost David 7 years ago and spent every day since then trying not to feel anything that deeply again. Now, looking at Marcus Drake and his empire of cruelty, she realized the truth. Refusing to love wasn't protection. It was just another kind of death. This child, Maris said softly, and her voice carried in the sudden silence, is Althea Davis, 6 months old. Her mother, Emily Davis, was murdered because she tried to expose her operation. Her father has spent 3 weeks running, bleeding, fighting to keep her safe. And me? I'm nobody special. Just a nurse who happened to be in the right place at the right time. But I'm done letting you hurt people I care about. She saw it. The moment Marcus's focus shifted from Jenny to her, the calculation changing. He was going to shoot. She could see it in his eyes, in the way his finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot, when it came, was deafening in the enclosed space. But it wasn't Marcus's gun that fired. It was a sniper, positioned on the warehouse rafters, who'd been waiting for a clean shot. The bullet took Marcus in the shoulder, not fatal. Carefully placed at his arm without killing. He dropped, screaming, and Jenny collapsed as agents swarmed forward, securing both of them. And just like that, it was over. The arrest happened fast after that. Marcus and his men, all taken into custody. Jenny, shaking and crying but alive, wrapped in a thermal blanket while paramedics checked her over. Rebecca, looking both furious and impressed, demanding to know what the hell Maris had been thinking stepping into the line of fire. Maris barely registered any of it. She was focused on Caden, who'd collapsed the moment the tactical team released him, his shoulder wound bleeding freely again. She was on her knees beside him instantly, Althea still in one arm while her other hand pressed against the wound. "You're an idiot," she told him, her voice shaking. "You know that? A complete idiot who almost got himself killed. Again. Saved my daughter, though, he gasped, trying to smile through the pain. We saved her. Together. Now shut up and let me stop you from bleeding out. I'm getting really tired of sewing you back together. He laughed, then winced. Sorry for the inconvenience. And there, kneeling on the dirty warehouse floor with blood on her hands and Althea, crying in her arms and sirens wailing outside, Maris felt something shift inside her. Something that had been broken for 7 years, finally clicking back into place. She wasn't alone anymore. She had a family, unconventional, built from trauma and desperation and midnight feedings, but real, hers. The weeks that followed were a blur of depositions and court appearances and news coverage that turned them into reluctant celebrities. The nurse who took down a trafficking ring was how the Sacramento Bee described Maris, which she found both flattering and deeply uncomfortable. The USB drive, combined with Marcus's recorded confession, brought down not just his operation, but a network that stretched across 3 states, 17 arrests, 43 victims freed, police officers, city officials, business owners, all facing charges that would put them away for decades. Emily Davis, Caden's wife, was finally remembered as a hero she'd been. Her name was on the case. Her investigation had started it all. And Althea? Althea was just a baby, oblivious of the fact that she'd been the catalyst for everything. She was teething now, drooling constantly, learning to sit up on her own. 6 months after that night in the warehouse, Maris stood in a courthouse for a different kind of proceeding. Adoption hearings weren't usually dramatic, but this one felt monumental. She wore her best dress. Well, her only dress, and stood beside Caden, who'd cleaned up remarkably well in a borrowed suit. Jenny was there, fully recovered and tearfully supportive. Rebecca had taken time off to attend. Grinning like this was the best outcome she'd ever seen from a case. When the judge declared the adoption final, when Althea officially became Althea Davis Chen, Maris felt tears streaming down her face and didn't bother to hide them. How does it feel? Caden asked later, as they walked through Capitol Park with Althea in a stroller between them. Being a mom? Maris thought about it, about how she'd spent years avoiding this exact thing. Connection, vulnerability, the terrifying possibility of loss. About how a bleeding stranger by a river had changed everything. Terrifying, she admitted, and perfect. Mostly terrifying, though. Caden laughed, then took her hand. They'd been dancing around their feelings for months, both afraid to name what had grown between them. But standing there in the spring sunshine, with their daughter babbling happily and Sacramento's Capitol building gleaming in the background, it seemed silly to keep pretending. I love you, he said simply. Thought you should know. Took you long enough, Maris replied, but she was smiling. I love you too, both of you, my strange, unexpected family. They kissed while Althea threw her stuffed duck on the ground and demanded attention, which seemed about right. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. It was better. Messier, realer, built on blood and courage and the choice to fight for each other when running away would have been easier. Because here's the truth about family. Sometimes it finds you in the darkest moments. Sometimes it arrives bleeding and desperate and asking you to be braver than you ever thought possible. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find the courage to say yes. Maris had spent years believing that love meant loss. That connection was just another word for vulnerability. Now she understood vulnerability was the only thing that made life worth living, the only thing that turned existence into meaning. She'd saved Caden that night by the river. But really, he'd save her right back. So here's my question for you. When was the last time you chose courage over comfort? When did you last risk everything for something or someone that mattered? Drop your story in the comments below. Tell me about the moment you decided to fight instead of run, to connect instead of hide. And if this story resonated with you, if Maris and Caden and Lil Althea made you believe in the power of unexpected families, hit that subscribe button. Share this with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to let people in, that the scariest choices sometimes lead to the most beautiful outcomes. Because we all have our rivers, those moments where we find someone bleeding, someone desperate, someone who needs us to be braver than we are. The question is, will you walk away Or will you choose to save them, knowing it might just save you too? Drop your answer below. I'll be reading every single one.